The air inside the packed courtroom was brittle with tension, every breath drawn as if it might shatter something fragile. In the split second before the gavel fell, everyone felt the weight of fate. Reporters hunched over notepads, families gripped each other's hands, and the accused, Daniel Mercer, a 32-year-old man with storm-gray eyes and a ruined suit, stared forward as if already seeing the world end. Judge Harmon said, "Order in the court," his voice slicing through the hush. The prosecutor stood, face gleaming with triumph, and announced, "Your Honor, we have new evidence, a confession." Murmurs exploded. Daniel's mother's knuckles whitened on the pew. His defense attorney's jaw clenched. Daniel whispered, "It can't be." But the gavel slammed down, silencing hope. The bailiff's eyes darted. The confession letter, trembling in the prosecutor's hands, was about to be read. Every camera's red light burned, every life in that room about to change forever. Because when the words came, there would be no turning back. The confession's first words echoed in the wood-paneled silence, each syllable hanging in the air like a death sentence. "I did it because I had no choice." The judge's pen froze above his notes. The prosecutor continued, voice thick with conviction. "These are the defendant's words, written in his own hand." Daniel's lips parted in disbelief. His mind scrambled to recall ever writing such a thing. The audience leaned forward as if gravity itself pulled them closer to the unfolding disaster. Reporters' pens scratched louder. Daniel's attorney leaned in, whispered, "Did you write this, Daniel?" Daniel shook his head, voice barely a breath. "No, I swear." Judge Harmon glanced over his glasses, searching Daniel's face for a crack in his composure. The confession, real or forged, had detonated a bomb in the courtroom. Somewhere in the gallery, Daniel's sister pressed a hand to her mouth, the fight for truth suddenly more urgent and more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined. A storm of whispers broke out as the prosecutor recited each damning line. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest, every eye in the room boring into him as if he were already condemned. "I had no choice. I regret everything," the prosecutor read, voice unwavering. Daniel's attorney, a veteran of impossible cases, scribbled a note. "Forgery?" and slid it toward Daniel. Daniel's hand shook as he wrote back, "Never wrote it." The judge banged the gavel once. "Enough." Silence snapped back. The prosecutor finished. "This letter was found in Mr. Mercer's apartment." A ripple of suspicion slithered through the gallery. Daniel's mind raced. Had someone broken in? Planted evidence? His mother's face crumpled. His sister's eyes filled with dread. The defense attorney stood, voice shaking with urgency. "We request an immediate handwriting analysis." The judge's gaze was unreadable, the courtroom pulsing with fear, anger, and the taste of disaster. Judge Harmon's voice sliced the air. "Order. The court will recess for 20 minutes while the letter is verified." Chairs scraped back, a swell of murmurs rose and fell. Daniel's attorney pulled him aside, face grave. "If this is a forgery, we'll expose it. But if it's real..." Daniel cut him off, voice raw. "It's not. Someone wants me destroyed." The bailiff motioned for Daniel to stand. He was led from the courtroom, cameras tracking every step. His mother reached out, fingertips brushing his sleeve before he was gone. Reporters surged toward the defense table, cameras whirring, questions pelting the air. "Did you write the letter?" Daniel's attorney shielded him. No comment. The hallway outside pulsed with tension. Daniel's world had been turned inside out in minutes, the fight of his life just beginning, each new revelation a threat waiting in the shadows. Outside, Daniel pressed his palm to the cold marble wall, breath shuddering. His attorney joined him, voice low. "This is bigger than the case now. We have to fight for your life." Daniel closed his eyes, memories flooding. Laughter with his sister, promises to his mother, everything he stood to lose. "They want me erased," he whispered. The attorney checked his watch, steeled himself. "We have 20 minutes. Who has access to your apartment? Anyone with a grudge?" Daniel shook his head, mind reeling. The courthouse clock struck, echoing like a warning bell. In the parking lot beyond the window, a shadow lingered, a figure in a dark coat, watching the building with patient, calculating eyes. Daniel stared out, the chill crawling deeper into his bones. He knew, in that moment, that the case was only the beginning, and someone out there wouldn't stop until his life was ruined forever. Daniel sat alone in a cramped consultation room, harsh fluorescent light flattening the colors of his world. His attorney, Robert Hayes, pored over the confession letter, frowning deeply. This handwriting is close but not perfect. Someone wanted it to look real. Daniel's fists clenched. Who would do this? Why? Robert sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. We need to go back. Everyone you've crossed, anyone who stood to gain from your fall. Daniel closed his eyes, thinking back to colleagues, rivals, old friends whose loyalty had always seemed fragile. There was a break-in a month ago, he whispered. I thought nothing was taken. Robert's eyes narrowed. And you told no one? Daniel nodded. No soul. What? Not a soul. For the first time, doubt flickered in Robert's eyes, not about Daniel's innocence, but about how deep this setup might run. Outside, a police officer's silhouette waited by the door, a silent reminder that time was against them. Back in the gallery, Daniel's mother, Margaret, tried to steady her trembling hands as Daniel's sister, Emily, squeezed her arm. Emily said, Mom, he's not alone, we'll get him out of this. Margaret's voice shook. He looks so lost. A neighbor leaned in, whispering, We believe in Daniel. This is all lies. But as the news cameras panned across the benches, doubt flickered in the eyes of old friends, suspicion blooming, fed by relentless headlines and the poisoned drip of gossip. The weight of public opinion pressed in, cold and relentless. Emily watched the door, searching for any sign of her brother, silently vowing not to let him face this storm alone. Margaret wiped her eyes, whispering, He was always so good. Why are they doing this to us? As the minutes ticked by, the family's unity became their last defense. Fragile, but unbroken in the glare of scandal. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps, microphones and cameras, trained on every family member and legal aid emerging from the building. Questions flew like arrows. Did Daniel confess? Is he guilty? Emily squared her shoulders, voice steady despite the quiver in her chest. My brother is innocent. This letter is a lie. Margaret hid her face from the cameras, but her grief was plain. Robert Hayes stepped forward, flanked by Daniel's shaken defense team. No further comment until we verify the evidence, he announced, eyes scanning the crowd for danger. Paparazzi flashes caught every flicker of pain, every shadow of fear. In the chaos, Daniel's name echoed through the air, distorted by rumor, reshaped by headlines. Emily caught her mother's arm, guiding her away. Don't listen to them, Mom. We know the truth, she whispered. But even she wondered how much truth could survive when the world wanted a villain. Inside the defense war room, Robert spread case files, surveillance photos, and Daniel's old journals across a cluttered table. Someone had access. We need to retrace every step. Daniel's eyes scanned pages, mind racing. What about my old coworker, Frank? He was angry after I got promoted. Robert nodded. Anyone else? Daniel hesitated. Julia. We argued. She left angry. Robert made notes, methodical and precise. We'll run background checks, financials, phone records. Someone wanted you framed. And they slipped. Daniel's confidence was brittle, haunted by doubt. What if they find something that makes me look guilty? Robert met his eyes, unwavering. Then we fight harder. I believe you. The walls of the war room felt tight, the air thick with dread and determination. Somewhere in that sea of evidence the truth was waiting, if they could survive long enough to find it. As midnight crept closer, Daniel sat alone in his childhood bedroom, walls lined with faded trophies and old photographs, shadows stretching long across the floor. He stared at the confession letter, every word, a poison in his mind. Outside, rain lashed the window, thunder rumbling like a distant verdict. He whispered, Why me? Who hates me enough to destroy everything? His phone buzzed with another news alert. Mercer case shocks city, betrayal or truth. Daniel's hands shook as he texted Emily. "I'm scared." She replied instantly, "We believe you, don't give up." For a moment, hope flickered in his chest, fragile, defiant. In the darkness, Daniel realized the battle would be fought, not just in court, but in every room he entered, every glance, every whisper. And tonight, even sleep would not bring peace. The next morning, Daniel trudged into the defense office, rainwater pooling beneath his shoes. Robert was already there, red-eyed but alert, surrounded by new case files. "Handwriting experts have the letter," Robert announced. "We'll have preliminary results by afternoon." Daniel forced a nod, exhaustion carved into his features. "They think I'm guilty. You saw the news." Robert's gaze was steady. "Public opinion doesn't decide the law, but it can poison a jury." Daniel sat heavily, staring at the timeline sprawling across the whiteboard. "Frank hasn't answered calls. Julia blocked my number." Robert jotted notes, undeterred. "I'll subpoena both. No more hiding." Daniel's anger flared. "Why would they turn on me? What did I ever do?" Robert softened. "Sometimes all it takes is envy, or a grudge, or a secret that's worth more than a friend." The rain hammered on, as if daring Daniel to keep fighting. In a cramped coffee shop across town, Julia Sinclair, early 30s, nervously stirred her drink, glancing at the door every few seconds. Her phone vibrated. A message from a blocked number simply reading, "You know what you did." She flinched, spilling coffee across the table. A barista frowned, but Julia barely noticed. Memories crashed through her mind. Arguments with Daniel, a confrontation outside his apartment, the night she stormed away, swearing never to return. She whispered, "It can't be," as her hands trembled. Outside, a shadowy figure lingered near the entrance, face obscured by a hood, watching Julia through the glass. The fear in Julia's eyes betrayed a secret, one she was desperate to keep buried. As she gathered her bag and rushed out, the figure melted into the crowd, but Julia could feel the threat following her, step for step, as if the past refused to stay hidden. The prosecution's office hummed with quiet confidence. Prosecutor Lewis adjusted his cufflinks as he reviewed the case file, smirking at the coverage on his tablet. His assistant, Maya, entered briskly. "Media's eating it up. Public thinks Daniel's guilty." Lewis nodded. "They'll convict him before the verdict even comes." Maya hesitated, lowering her voice. "But if the letter's a forgery?" Lewis' smile faded. "Then we pivot. Attack his character, his temper, his debts, old grievances." He closed the folder with a snap. "It's not about truth. It's about what the jury believes." Outside, the city pulsed with rumors, feeding on doubt. Lewis stood at the window, eyes glinting. "Let Mercer try to clear his name. We'll bury him with doubt." Maya's reflection flickered beside his, her unease growing. The stakes had shifted. For some, justice was just a performance. Handwriting analysis came back faster than expected. Robert burst into Daniel's apartment, a spark of hope in his eyes. "The letter's inconclusive, but the experts flagged inconsistencies. Not a match, but not enough to clear you." Daniel's shoulders sagged. "So it's still my word against theirs." Robert shook his head. "No, we have leverage. The paper isn't from your apartment. Lab says it's office stock, not home." Daniel's mind spun. "Whose office?" Robert grinned. "We'll subpoena your old firm. Maybe someone left fingerprints." Daniel's chest tightened with new hope, but fear lingered. Every small victory felt like a feint before a bigger blow. Outside, thunder cracked and rain hammered the windows. Robert pressed a hand to Daniel's shoulder. "We're not out yet, but this is the first break we've had." Daniel managed a grateful smile. The darkness lifting, if only for a moment. As night descended, Daniel found himself at his old firm's office, peering through rain-speckled glass at the empty lobby. He remembered late nights, shared jokes, the sharp smell of printer ink. Now, suspicion poisoned every memory. Security lights flickered. He watched as Robert spoke to the night guard, presenting a court order. The guard, an elderly man with wary eyes, hesitated, then led them to the records room. Every footstep echoed with tension. Inside, rows of paper stock and printing logs lined the shelves. Daniel ran a hand over a familiar box, the exact brand identified by the lab. Who else had access? Robert asked. The guard shrugged. Half the office, cleaning crew, night staff. Daniel's heart pounded. The truth felt close, but so did danger. He knew every answer would only lead to more questions, and every step forward put him in someone's crosshairs. Back at the defense office, tension hung like a thundercloud. Robert fielded calls from hostile reporters while Daniel scrolled social media, reading venomous comments. His former friends, his own boss, all calling him a liar. A new headline blared, Mercer fraud, more evidence emerges. Daniel's phone rang, an unknown number. He answered with a wary, "Hello?" The voice on the other end was chillingly familiar, Frank. "Stop digging, Daniel. Some things are bigger than you." Daniel froze. "Are you threatening me?" But Frank hung up. Robert watched Daniel's face blanch. "Who was that?" Daniel stammered. "Frank, he just warned me off." Robert swore. "He's scared. That means he knows more than he's letting on." For the first time, Daniel realized that he was up against more than a legal battle. Loyalty was splintering, and betrayal crept in through every crack. The defense's investigation pointed to Julia. That night, Daniel and Robert found her pacing outside her apartment, glancing nervously up and down the street. "Julia!" Daniel called out. She turned, her face a mask of guilt and fear. "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered, voice cracking. "Then why lie? Why now?" Robert pressed. Julia's eyes filled with tears. "Frank said I'd lose everything if I told the truth. He made threats." Daniel's anger gave way to shock. "He blackmailed you?" Julia nodded. "Frank was always jealous. He wanted to ruin you." Robert scribbled notes, every detail sharpening the case's outline. Daniel's betrayal burned deeper, but something else took root, resolve. Julia's voice trembled. "I'll testify. I'm done being afraid." The truth had a price, but for the first time, Daniel felt hope piercing the gloom. Julia's confession was a turning point. In a sterile interview room, she detailed everything: Frank's threats, the planted letter, her regret for staying silent. "He used me," she said softly. "I let him." The detective, stone-faced, recorded every word. Robert reassured her, "You're doing the right thing now." Daniel's emotions churned. Relief, anger, a strange sadness for the friend he'd lost. "Frank always needed someone to blame," Daniel murmured, almost to himself. Julia reached for Daniel's hand, but he flinched, pain raw and fresh. Robert passed the detective a copy of the lab report. "The letter's paper matches Frank's office supply order." The detective nodded. "This changes everything." Julia's statement brought the conspiracy into focus, but it also exposed just how fragile trust could be. As Julia wept, Daniel finally saw how deeply betrayal had fractured every part of his life. The betrayal didn't stop with Julia. The next day, Daniel's old boss, Mr. Pike, called a press conference, distancing the company from Daniel and leaking confidential emails that twisted harmless jokes into damning evidence. "This is a tragedy for everyone involved," Pike intoned, "but we must protect our reputation." Daniel watched in horror as his private life became ammunition. Robert slammed a fist on the table. "They're throwing you to the wolves." Daniel shook with fury. "It's not enough to frame me. They want to erase me." Emily sent a desperate message. "Don't give up. We're still here." Daniel's mother prayed in the next room, her voice trembling. The last of Daniel's safety nets had snapped. The betrayal was now total. Company, colleagues, friends. All that was left was to fight with whatever shreds of truth remained. Alone in a darkened room, Daniel replayed the betrayals: Frank's threats, Julia's confession, his boss's cowardice. The city hummed beyond the window, uncaring. Daniel pressed his forehead to the glass, breath fogging the cold pane. Robert entered quietly. "They want you broken, Daniel. Don't give them that." Daniel's voice cracked. "How do I fight when everyone I trusted turned on me?" Robert handed him a folder. "With evidence. With the truth. Julia's statement, the lab report. They're afraid because you're close." Daniel turned the folder over in his hands, feeling the weight of both hope and despair. Outside, rain began again, streaking the glass with silver. Daniel whispered, "Let them come. I'm still standing." For the first time, resolve overcame fear. He would not be destroyed. Not tonight. The morning of the hearing, Daniel arrived at the courthouse with a new sense of purpose. Julia's sworn statement and the forensic report weighed heavy in Robert's briefcase. As they entered, news crews pressed in, firing questions. "Did you fake the confession, Daniel?" Robert held up a hand. "No comment until court." Inside, Daniel caught Emily's eye, her face tight with worry, but her nod was full of belief. Margaret squeezed Daniel's hand, whispering, "We're with you, no matter what." In the corridor, Frank stood alone, back to the wall, watching Daniel approach with a look that flickered between guilt and defiance. Daniel paused, meeting his gaze. "It's over, Frank. You don't have to keep running." Frank looked away, jaw clenched. Robert leaned in. "Let's focus on the facts. The truth is on our side." As they stepped into the courtroom, Daniel felt the storm gathering for a final reckoning. Courtroom silence was absolute as Julia took the stand. Prosecutor paced before her, tone cold. "Miss Sinclair, were you coerced into providing this statement?" Julia swallowed, voice trembling but clear. "Frank threatened me," he said. "If I spoke out, he'd ruin my family." The judge's gaze sharpened, and the jury leaned forward, every detail electric. "Did you see Frank plant evidence?" Robert asked on cross. Julia nodded. "He used company paper and forged Daniel's handwriting. I saw him do it." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Daniel squeezed his fists beneath the table, rage and relief warring inside him. Frank shifted uncomfortably, sweat beading on his brow. The prosecutor attempted to rattle Julia, but her resolve held. For the first time, the balance shifted, Julia's courage planting a seed of doubt in the hearts of the jury and the press alike. On cross-examination, Frank was called to the stand. His eyes darted across the room, sweat glistening at his temples. Robert's questions cut like knives. "Frank, did you have access to the company's office supplies? Did you ever enter Daniel's apartment?" Frank stammered, I may have." "Everyone did." The judge's voice boomed. "Answer clearly, Mr. Connolly." Frank's hand shook as Robert presented the lab report matching the forged letters, paper stock to Frank's supply order. The courtroom stilled. "Did you write the letter?" Robert demanded. Silence. Then Frank muttered, "I made a mistake. I never meant for it to go this far." Shock exploded through the gallery. The judge rapped his gavel, restoring order. Daniel stared at Frank, heart pounding, disbelief flooding in. In that moment, the entire case teetered on the razor's edge between destruction and redemption. The confession stunned the courtroom into silence. Frank's words echoed, his face crumbling beneath the weight of what he'd done. The prosecutor tried to salvage his case, objecting furiously, but the judge waved him off. "This court will have order. The witness has confessed to fabricating evidence." The jury whispered amongst themselves, the shock palpable. Daniel leaned back, exhaling for what felt like the first time in weeks. Margaret and Emily clung to each other, tears streaming down their faces. Robert rested a steadying hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You did it. We did it." But even as relief washed through the defense, Daniel could not shake the cost. The friendships lost, the trust shattered, the scars that would never fully heal. The judge announced a recess. The nightmare was ending, but the damage would linger long after the courtroom emptied. During recess, Daniel stepped into the hallway, pulse pounding, world spinning. Reporters clamored, but this time the questions were softer, more uncertain. Emily threw her arms around him, voice trembling with joy. "You're free, Danny." Margaret pressed his face in her hands, whispering, "Thank God. We never stopped believing." Robert joined them, eyes misty. The truth survived Daniel, even when everything else was lost. For a moment, sunlight broke through the courthouse windows, bathing them in hope. Daniel looked out across the city. His reputation forever changed, but his life still his own. In the crowd, Julia lingered, a bittersweet smile on her face, then disappeared into the throng. The war wasn't over, but Daniel had won his freedom. The cost was brutal, but in the echoing hallway, surrounded by love, he knew he was finally starting over. Court reconvened under the harsh glow of midday. Every seat was filled, tension coiled tight. The judge's voice was steely as he addressed the courtroom. "You've heard confessions and seen evidence that challenges our faith in justice itself. Today we will have closing arguments." The prosecutor spoke first, voice hollow, painting Daniel as a man with secrets we may never understand. The jury sat impassive, eyes weary. Then Robert rose, fire in his voice. "My client has been betrayed by friends, framed by jealousy, and hunted by the very system meant to protect him. He stands before you, not as a villain, but as a survivor." Daniel's gaze swept the room, meeting each juror's eye, some skeptical, some moved. Margaret and Emily gripped each other's hands, hope flickering. For Daniel, this was the final battle. The verdict would decide if he could ever reclaim the life that had been stolen from him. Silence thickened as the jury retired to deliberate. Daniel, Margaret, Emily, and Robert huddled in a quiet conference room, the tick of the wall clock relentless. Daniel whispered, "What if they don't believe us?" Robert squeezed his shoulder. "We gave them the truth. That's all anyone can do." Emily brushed a tear away, forcing a smile. "No matter what, we fight together." Margaret murmured a prayer, clutching Daniel's hand in both of hers. Across the hall, Julia waited alone, hope and regret etched in every line of her face. Every second dragged, the weight of possibility suffocating. Outside, reporters milled like vultures, feeding on the scent of blood and redemption. In those moments, the family found strength in each other, the only anchor in a world that still seemed intent on tearing them apart. Time stopped, hearts pounding in unison as they waited for fate to be decided. The jury returned. Daniel's legs trembled as he stood, facing the bench. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, handed the verdict slip to the bailiff. The judge unfolded the paper, the world holding its breath. "On the count of forgery and obstruction, we find the defendant, Daniel Mercer." A pause that stretched for eternity. "Not guilty." Gasps and sobs erupted. Margaret collapsed into tears. Emily threw her arms around Daniel. Robert exhaled a shuddering breath. Even the stoic judge's eyes glistened. The prosecutor bowed his head, defeated. Frank was escorted away in handcuffs, haunted and broken. Daniel could barely process the words. For a moment, the weight was gone. He was free. The nightmare was ending. Reporters rushed to capture the moment, flashes exploding. Daniel looked up, gratitude and disbelief etched into his every feature. The moment spilled out into the hallway, a tide of celebration and disbelief. Daniel was mobbed by family and supporters, hugs and congratulations echoing off marble walls. Margaret sobbed openly, whispering, "You came home to us." Emily pressed a trembling kiss to Daniel's cheek. Reporters swarmed, microphones reaching, desperate for a statement. Daniel steadied himself, voice raw but clear. "Justice isn't easy and sometimes it nearly breaks you. But I never gave up. I'm grateful for my family, for the truth, for everyone who believed when it was hardest to believe." Robert stood by, proud and spent. Julia watched from afar, face streaked with tears, her part in Daniel's freedom forever marked in memory. As the cameras flashed and the world watched, Daniel realized he had survived something worse than prison. He'd survived being forgotten, and that was victory enough. Long after the crowd dispersed, Daniel stood in the empty courtroom, quiet at last. He let his fingers trail across the polished wood of the defense table, the echoes of struggle still whispering in the silence. Robert entered, coat over his arm. Ready to go home? Daniel nodded, his eyes full of both weariness and wonder. I'm not sure what home is anymore, but I know I'm not alone. Robert smiled. You fought for your life, Daniel. Now live it. Outside, the city was alive with the rush of ordinary life. A world that had moved on while Daniel's was frozen. He paused at the threshold, looking back one last time. Shadows and sunlight danced on the floor. With a deep breath, Daniel stepped into freedom, scarred but undefeated, knowing the story would follow him, but so would hope. The trial was over. His life was his again. Daniel woke to a quiet morning, the first in months without dread gnawing at his heart. Sunlight filtered through unfamiliar curtains. Emily's guest room had become a refuge while he rebuilt. He watched his family at breakfast, laughter struggling to return to their routine. Margaret fussed over coffee, her hands steadier than before. Emily tapped her phone, scheduling job interviews for Daniel, determined to restore his name. Daniel tried to join their hope, but doubt crept in with every spoonful. The world outside moved on as if nothing had changed, but inside these walls, every word was measured, every joy fragile. He glanced at a newspaper headline, Mercer acquitted. Below, an editorial asked if justice had truly been served. Daniel folded the paper away, vowing not to let others decide his worth again. He would find a way forward, scarred but still fighting. Daniel walked the city streets, every step a test of courage. Strangers recognized him, averted gazes, whispered rumors, a rare nod of respect. At a cafe window, he glimpsed his own reflection, uncertain if the man staring back was the same one who entered that courtroom. He passed by his old office, memories flickering, Frank's betrayal, Julia's confession, years of trust unraveled in days. Still, some former colleagues watched from inside, some pitying, some suspicious, some regretful. Daniel squared his shoulders and kept moving. The city was wide and indifferent, but also full of second chances for those who dared to try. A child bumped into him, smiling up with no idea of his story. Daniel managed a genuine smile in return. Maybe he couldn't control the world's opinion, but he could choose who he would become now that he was free. At a small park, Daniel met Julia for the first time since the trial ended. She waited on a bench beneath a canopy of gold leaves, nervous but resolute. "Thank you for telling the truth," Daniel said quietly. Julia nodded, eyes rimmed red. "I wish I'd done it sooner. I'm sorry for everything." Daniel sat beside her, letting the silence speak for a moment. "We can't go back, but we can try to forgive ourselves." Julia looked away, tears brimming. "You lost so much because of me." Daniel shook his head gently. "Frank did this. You broke the chain." They sat together as leaves fell around them, two people bound by pain, but also by survival. As Julia left, she turned and said, "Find your peace, Daniel." He watched her go, letting the past begin to loosen its grip, however slowly. Daniel returned home to his empty apartment, silence greeting him like an old friend. Dust motes swirled in the window light. He moved through the space, gathering reminders of the man he used to be, old case notes, forgotten photos, the suit he wore the day his life fell apart. He boxed up memories, unsure what to keep, what to let go. In the mirror, his eyes looked older, but there was resolve in the set of his jaw. He opened a letter from the courthouse, official notice of his acquittal, stamped and sealed. It felt both final and meaningless, justice, but never a return to innocence. Daniel stood at the window, watching the city pulse below. He realized freedom wasn't an end. It was only the beginning of another fight, to rebuild, to forgive, to live with what remained. That night, Daniel stepped onto the rooftop, city lights stretching to the horizon. The cold air stung, sharp and bracing. He called Margaret, promising to visit soon. He texted Emily, "I'll be okay." Alone beneath the stars, Daniel let the wind wash over him, carrying away the last shreds of terror and shame. He spoke quietly, as if to the world itself. "I am not what they called me. I survive. For a moment, the city seemed to pause, listening. Daniel's future was unwritten, scarred but filled with possibility. He closed his eyes, remembering the pain and the courage it took to stand in the fire and not break. As dawn approached, Daniel watched the sky turn blue, knowing he would never be the same. But he was still here. He was still standing. And that at last was enough.